Welcome back. If you're here, that means that you haven't been scared off yet and are eager young minds ready to absorb all the toxins, knowledge I have to share with you. So now with the essentials of pre-game prep out of the way for yourself and your players, you finally nailed down some concepts for your game, and that Roger's the one bringing over the snacks. So as you sit down and prepare some basic notes and concepts for your game, you begin to realize that making an enjoyable story, let alone a coherent one, can be fairly daunting. Making a plot is the next hardest step for many new storytellers, regardless of the system. Trying to link events and scenes together into a narrative whole can be a daunting process. Even people in Hollywood have a hard time with this. Storytelling, not just the game mastering part of it, is an art form, and like any art, it gets better with the more you practice. So today, we're going to be talking about all the aspects of how to make a good story and scene through the use of story hooks. I'm going to be explaining where they come from and how to use them to knit together pieces of the plot and drag interested players deeper into the game world. I'll explain how to plan out both individual scenes and long-term stories. This won't make you an instant expert because, as I said, one only gets better in art by practice. But this should give you a good head start on what direction you should try out and the common pitfalls along the way. We won't be discussing mechanics today, just story. In theory, you could apply this video to universally any RPG or story, but as the series suggests, I'll be focusing it with a special nod towards the setting of Exalted itself. However, we should keep one thing in mind that's universally true no matter what, keeping your core audience in mind. That is, the people at the game itself. Making a good story for them to enjoy is like making a good screenplay for them to enjoy. Storytellers serve as the directors, capable of changing and editing the story as needed in order to provide the maximum enjoyment for everyone at the table, not just the players or the storyteller themselves. Yes, this includes the storytellers too. Try to enjoy learning how to provide engaging content, such as interesting NPCs, clever mysteries, and tense moments. This may sound difficult, but you need to realize your goal isn't to be the next Shakespeare. Your goal is to amuse your friends for several hours. Once you realize this and don't slack off, things become much more easier and far less stressful. So, let's get into the proper parts of it, shall we? Part 1. Starting the story and collecting plot hooks. Surprise! We're not done with the pregame yet. So one important thing you should do with your players during the pregame is what their character is all about. Their past, their goals, and their stats. This is often called Session 0, where you play a session not just playing the actual game, but just working things out. This is the best time to collect what I call plot hooks, one of the most critical resources for telling any story. Plot hooks are any narrative elements you can use to hook a person into your story, getting them invested and interested in it. Plot hooks are additionally used to grab hold of a story and drag it along the tracks of progression. They can be both extremely subtle or hit with the force of a heavyweight boxer. So in essence, they're important. It's what I use in order to drive my own games. Plot hooks can either be goals your players have, what they want to do in a game, or aspects of the overall central story that you may have. If one of your players wants their character to look for their long-lost brother, that's a plot hook. If one of your players says they want to deal with pirates, that's a plot hook. An idea for an overarching story you may have for the realm, making the lives of locals a living hell as they ruthlessly exploit them for work, that's a plot hook. Each of these things can grab a current moment in the game and drag it into a brand new direction. Good scenes will often have hooks interwoven into them, leading players along scene by scene in a seamless and organic fashion. When planning out a game, make note of player goals, wants, and ideas that you may have, so you may later refine them and reforge them into plot hooks later on down the line. Now, a good storyteller can make any game good, but I also believe it's a player's responsibility to help weave a game's story as well. This can be done even during character generation. Unless you're a hermit, no man is truly an island. So instead of Christmas treeing, that is, buying tons of artifacts at the start of the game, encourage players to take backgrounds that help make sense for the character themselves. Is your character a general? Start off with some command and resources to represent how you're a successful general. A charming socialite may have followers, allies, or influence in spades, along with an extra language or two. A powerful sorcerer could have contacts, and numerous sorceress allies who share his pact, or maybe a man's for the location of his power. A martial artist could very well have a mentor she learns from, and retainers she promised to teach the ways of her own art. A character's backstory can be used to explain not only why a character has the backgrounds they do have, but can introduce even more plot hooks. So ask your players questions relating to this. What was your birth? Were you born as a poor farmer, to nobility, or to a barbarian tribe? Was your youth filled with hard work, toiling in the fields, harsh studies by the tutors your family got for you, or by listening to the tales of your clan shaman in starry-eyed rapture? In your adult life, were you the village strongman and protector, warding off wolves and would-be ruffians? Did you come to realize the burden your parents placed upon you as you struggle to become the son that they want you to be? Did your clan shaman die unexpectedly, and now you attempt to enact the lessons he imparted upon you to become the next spiritual ambassador for your people? Even the moment of your exaltation is something we can use. Did you head off to fight a Raksha raiding party with only a pitchfork in hand, only to find yourself bathed in golden light? Did your prince find the hidden tomb of his ancestors, which contained not only treasures, but tales from a brighter time with words full of hope? Did your shaman stand against a corrupt god in the name of his people, or vengeance for his fallen mentor? All of these things are important to help flesh out some plot hooks. They don't need to be multi-paragraph stories either, as even simple, one-sentence statements can guide a player along their life path and help them fill in the blanks later. All of these are story elements that serve as massive plot hooks, so instead of grabbing 2 Artifact 5s, ask players how they can use aspects of the game world to cement themselves and immerse themselves in the game world, rather than float on top of it, just merely existing. As a side note, you might hear some people say they don't enjoy making backstories and rather develop such things in play. Which is fair, but this is fairly difficult. I've only seen experienced players used to playing RPGs pull this off correctly. At the very minimum, try to have them nail down a concept and possibly how they exalted if you need additional plot hooks. Bruce Wayne's backstory could be simply summarized as rich man vigilante crime fighter who fights because he's traumatized by his parents' death. This provides a framework for both the storyteller and the player can work with. Further details, such as intricacies and backstory bits, can be worked out in play. I only recommend this with more experienced players with storytellers, as it's quite easy for a character to develop flat, as in not having enough chances to fill in important holes that they could be missing. Also keep in mind, most exaltations seek the exceptional. You're not great because you exalted because you are great. Exalts can be nearly any age or background. A prince has just as much of a chance as a peasant, assuming they're willing to take risks few men would take. While rare, a young teenager could exalt, protecting her mother from an abusive father, while the bold in the north was a senior who lived a full life until he was blessed with a second breath. Some exalted are very different. Dragon-blooded are often the scions of the most powerful empire in the world, raised from birth for their role in winning the genetic lottery. Alchemicals are heroes who were forged, forming identity from the countless reincarnations that came before them. And liminals are the souls trying to discover themselves after waking up in the body of a dead man. Each of these are different stories to tell, but they all have one thing in common. They came from great people. For player goals, you probably heard how Exalted encourages you to go big in your aspirations. The book tries to get this across in its own subtle way, but people might be telling you to take such motivations as becoming the greatest martial artist in history, take over the realm, or storm the gates of heaven itself. It's true that all of these are motivations you can have, but if a lot of players are not used to the game world of Exalted, it's fine to start with something much smaller. Conquering a kingdom ruled by a mortal king? That's fine. Wanting to liberate a town held by realm forces? That's also fine. Wanting to start your own tea house? That's a bit too small. But instead, you want to make a tea house so good and so influential that anyone who's anyone will want to get their gatherings taking place there? Will you train your staff to collect any rumors that you might hear? Now we're talking. These are not goals that are not too easy nor impossible. Rather, they're challenging for beginning players and an excellent way for them and yourself to get used to the setting. All of this helps by having a solid pitch for the beginning of a game. A pitch is essentially a reason for why you want to join that game, often telling you exactly what you'll be doing when you first start the game, where you'll be playing, and other details. A pitch could be something like describing the beginning of an epic story, or just honestly, you and your players just find something fun to do. A pitch tends to help players plan their characters, as often they'll be expected to build characters capable of interacting with this pitch in some way, shape, or form. Secondly, it piques players' interest in the game world, and you want your players to be interested in your game. Lastly, as an important pregame note, there's a matter of how to get your players actually together in the game. You can try to make them all strangers who meet up, but unless there's someone manipulating things behind the scenes, it's rather difficult to make several strangers meet up without one being heavily railroaded. Exalted does this a bit better and easier in some ways though. When two people meet each other, they could be bombarded with vivid memories of their Exaltation's past lives, recalling memories of both joy and sorrow, hardship and celebration. Or one player could receive a sign from the unconquered sun himself, the patron god of the solar Exalted, to meet up with others of his kind in this harsh and unforgiving world. Alternatively, you could rig for some action right off the start, with other players quickly knowing a solar is nearby when someone starts flaring. Or you can just sidestep this by assuming the players meet up before the game even starts itself. There could even be some pre-made dynamics between each of the players to help better fit into their game and explain how they fit within each other. Now our second step is taking each player's goals into account. What does each player want to see in the game? What does each of their characters want to do? Keep these goals in mind when deciding the goals of the NPCs in the areas, especially the movers and shakers. If the goals of the players goes up against the NPCs, then more than likely conflict is going to be involved. If the goals of the NPCs align with the players, then a possible partnership may form. We don't know where things are going to go for sure until the game begins, but one of your tasks as a storyteller is going to be predicting some events, along with a rough outline of what will happen. We'll be getting into how to do this later, but keep that in mind for now. Alright, now that we've data mined the players, it's time to move on to the next step. Data mining the game location. Are there any canonical movers or shakers in the area? These things include such things as powerful or influential NPCs, countries, spirit or rockshell courts, or even specific locales such as manses or shadowlands. This is the part where you, the storyteller, are going to be investing a little bit of legwork. Keep in mind the rule of 3 from last video, meaning at the very least have 3 places of interest within every area with 3 NPCs. You don't need to go full blast into this stage, at least not yet. The goal here is to make the players have some well-crafted tools and toys in a little sandbox to play with. For relevant plot information, you can check the main core book, but at the time of this video, I would recommend checking out 2nd edition and 1st edition's lore books on the area in question. The 1st edition tends to give out a more mystical explanation, while the 2nd edition gives a lot of straight-up information. People have their preferences on which they prefer, but I think both complement one another. Aim for the setting and mystery of the 1st edition, while you want just raw information, go with the 2nd edition. Oh yes, one more thing before ending this section. Does a player want to play a lone wolf who does things his own way type character? The one with both a stealth and little or no history or connections? This should raise an immediate red flag. The lone wolf archetype can be pulled off successfully, but more often than not it backfires. In my opinion, a key to a good group is chemistry between all the players and their characters. And if your lone wolf is just going out doing his own little side adventures all by himself, and the only thing that means is they're hogging up the game. I'm not saying do everything together all the time. I believe all groups have small periods of time where their characters can individually do something. But such a thing should not come at the cost of group enjoyment. There is a difference between moving the entire story or plot along versus hijacking a game to only do things by yourself. Part 2. Using plot hooks to make scenes. Now that we've finally collected all these plot hooks, we can get into the interesting part. How to use them in order to make stories. This can be a one-off adventure which doesn't strongly tie into a central plot line, or could be the first of a long internet-connected chain of events that works up to some grand central climax. Examples of central plot lines can be very simple in premise. Do you want to rid a Death Lord from creation? Has there been a foretold prophecy of some great disaster in the region that your players want to stop? Has some sort of great item of power surfaced within the area and now everyone is scrambling to obtain said item? Do they want to become the next pirate king? Or maybe you're just not ready to invest in the system yet, and want to do something lower key, such as taking over a specific area of creation and seeing where it leads from there. This can also be useful if you have a relatively new group or new at running a game in general. It lets you get an idea of the small picture before moving on to a bigger one. Now here comes the tricky part, bolting these ideas together using plot hooks. Think on how these things can be interrelated to one another, how they can connect with each other and the player characters. This doesn't mean the players physically knowing the location, but rather how the players would be invested in it. Would a shaman hear the plight of a local elemental court and seek to remove the maculates from the area? Or would your pirate captain with a heart of gold seek to liberate the locals from the harsh conditions that the realm imposes as a strip-mine location? Or maybe you just want a land where you can start a new kingdom, and clearing out these problems is just one step towards that goal. Each of these things are plot hooks, as they can connect one aspect of the story to another by creating conflict. Not just physical conflict, but dramatic conflict. Now I might be hearing you say, "But Sandact, I have a mountain of plot hooks. What am I going to be doing with all of them?" Well, grab your tackle box. We're going fishing for scenes. The smallest unit of time you can plan around your game are scenes. In Exalted, a scene is an actual duration, but it's a useful metric for any game. It's a period of time which action takes place in without any cut in time or location. A scene could be a high-tension combat, carefully sneaking past guards, talking with the locals, or spending time with a loved one. Typically, scenes have some sort of purpose in them, some kind of goal a player wants to attain within it. To make these interesting, obstacles are placed in the way of such goals, be it physically, mentally, or socially. How we make these scenes is that we often dangle a plot hook inside of it, a reason a player would want to head towards and accomplish such a scene. A session is often several linked together scenes which drive players towards some sort of purpose. The story being an overall arc which players attempt to accomplish some sort of long-term goal, which, you guessed it, has a central plot hook inside of it. This is what I meant by plot hooks being important and pretty central to a lot of planning. What this means is that, yes, once you learn how to make effective scenes, then sessions and stories fall in place a lot more easily because they follow a very similar structure. They're still different. In fact, we'll be covering how they're different in the next part, but for now we'll focus on scenes, as they're the smallest building block that we actually have at our disposal. Now the thing to keep in mind about scenes is that they're the smallest unit we can actually make stories out of. In a dungeon crawling game, each room would be a set piece for a scene. For example, if there's a chest in the room, there's nothing narratively interesting if the players can walk over the chest and grab their +2 longsword from it. What makes it interesting are the things in the way of that objective, and while a great scene can use it to link into another scene organically, that is making sense within the game world. Skeletons blocking the way of the chest, we have a physical challenge to overcome to get the chest. An ancient ancestor ghost who holds the key to the chest for a beloved, that's a social obstacle players need to overcome. Maybe the chest is locked and requires a lockpicking check to open. That's a skill-based or mental challenge. All of these are things that do not take up an entire session in the game. In fact, it would take anywhere between 5 minutes to an hour, depending on the complexity of the task at hand. But what do I mean by making this entire thing flow organically from one scene to the next? There are ways to do that for each one. The skeletons could, example, be oddly out of place in the area. But what if it could be the work of an apprentice necromancer in the area, and now the players need to deal with it? The ghostly widow could give you the key under the premise that you find her husband's bones and finally lay them to rest, saying how long ago her husband went to slay a great monster and never returned. The skill check for the chest could pop it open, but for the sword inside of it to be a complete mystery, requiring the players to find the skills of an expert appraiser to learn what it is. Each of these scenes have a possibility to flow organically into the next, and I just thought of these off the top of my head within seconds. Now this may sound like a lot of work to arrange scenes in this order while not railroading the players. Railroading means there's only one set path or outcome for players to follow. You may get away with this in other games more easily, but not in Exalted, and it becomes quite difficult with how powerful the players are. Ideally, you shouldn't strive for this at all, as it robs players' agency. Players won't feel like they have a choice in the game world, as no matter what they do, things will always progress anyways. This may sound complicated, but it's really not. Rather than making a single path for a scene, try to keep multiple options open. Deus Ex is a good example of this. If you think you found one option for doing something, there's actually a good half dozen or so that you miss that lead to different outcomes. An example of this in Deus Ex Human Revolution is when you need to get information from a political advocate. He's doing a speech on live TV, and you have two primary options. You can decide to head in while he's delivering a speech and challenge his own beliefs on live TV, to which after the conference he'll meet you in person and discuss things. Alternatively, you can infiltrate his own office, sneaking past all the guards backstage in order to go to his private journal to learn what you need to know that way. Even better, you can also decide to frame him for a crime if you even wanted. So what this means is that it opens up options for how players want to tackle challenges placed in front of them. Doing things either by brute force, intellectual cutting, or chopping the pants off of the person. Now, sometimes a course of action is just an action that takes little effort aside from the desired outcome. That is, to accomplish the current goal of the scene. But one thing to always keep in mind is how the players accomplish these goals. Sure, intimidating a guard to let you in the city has the same outcome as charming him to let you in the city. But when you intimidate the guard, the other guards of the city might become far more leery of your group, as gossip spreads amongst the guards. Compare it to just charming a guard, which might let you have the guard awkwardly hitting on you, but ultimately leaving you alone. If we instead bribe the guard, then we might have a solid contact in the future for getting more questionable items into the city itself. But Sandak, I hear you say, you're asking us to plan for every eventuality? That's impossible! Unlike a video game, there are infinite choices in tabletop games! Yes, that's true. Trying to figure out every possible outcome is impossible. So what you do is plan for several possible outcomes for players that they may take ahead of time. Try placing yourself in the player's shoes, and try guess what they're probably going to be doing. So you don't need to overplan these scenes, as once you have stats for your opponents, then a very loose guideline often suffices. If your players want to enter the city, then your options are be either talking to the town guard, sneaking in, or if you're really ballsy, just knocking out the front gate. Unless you're in a war zone, most people don't take the last option. We'll keep that as a plan D for the players. The only things you need to keep in mind is if players do X, Y happens. That's really it. With the players making actions, then the scenes can flow one into the next in a seamless fashion, because your players be strung along by plot hooks. They either want to do something or be reacting to something that appears in the next scene. You don't need to go through the effort of painstakingly planning out each and every scene detail. Rather, at most, have one central goal and the players pivot around it, and maybe develop a few cool ideas to help spice up a scene, such as a battlefield collapsing and players fighting on the rubble on it that falls down a cliff. Now, being a bit loose with the rules means that you often need to roll with the punches a bit more. With experience, you'll be able to guess what players are going to be able to do in a session. But there always comes a time when you're thrown a curveball. There are times where you need to learn how to adapt. When the players want to sneak in the city, but you didn't account for that as a main option, we need to adapt. If a player has context involving the underworld or criminal organizations, now would be the time to contact them. You need to declare a fact, or some other rule such as socialize or larceny, that say that you know a guy that can get you into the city. For a price. Now, I've explained the details of going scene to scene. That helps pull a session along. But how do you make a good story for your players? Part 3. Making a story. Now before we get into making a story, I need to set some expectations straight. There are people way better than I am that know how to make a compelling story. Such a craft has been developed since the dawn of man in cave paintings. What I'm going to be discussing with you today is how to make a good story in a tabletop RPG. One difference is that you're going to be needing to improv. When you consume other media, learning story ideas and going, oh man, I really want to try that, or have an NPC act in such a specific way, go ahead and try this. But keep in mind, many stories have authors very carefully and painstakingly build scenes with total narrative control. You will not have this in any tabletop game. So we do not need to make a perfect story. We just need to make a story that everyone at the table enjoys. Trust me, there's a huge difference between the two. I'm not trying to say slack off, but don't force yourself to go along with the oh my god epic tales of other RPG sessions you might be hearing. Let those stories inspire you, but forge your own path and style, and in the process, great games and fun times will be had by all. With that in mind, making a story isn't much different than making individual scenes. The same principles apply in making players work towards some kind of central goal that takes many sessions to accomplish. Like scenes, stories can flow from one to the next in reaction to the player's own choices and options. Oftentimes, the first story will be the initial pitch of a game. which will lead to various other stories the players can choose to follow. But making a story does require a little bit of foresight. While you can largely wing scenes easily before session, a story might take a little bit more time. This is because you want to avoid making tons of plot hooks that end up nowhere, poorly thought out and explained. But just like scenes, this isn't as complicated as it might seem. Now if you're having some kind of grand overall story tying to the game, such as Deathlord Invasion, then you're going to need a little bit more structure. Winging it completely is not going to work, not unless you're really lucky. What you need to do to make a story seem like it's flowing freely, but allow you to get back on course with the story you want is actually pretty simple. Design some scenes ahead of time with the criteria of when they can be activated. For example, let's say that your story involves meeting one of the Deathlord diplomats at a fancy party. The activation condition could be something of becoming enough of a local power in an area that an invitation for your group is only natural. To make players really go for scenes, you can often mix other plot hooks in there, such as a player's rival going to the same party, or maybe some kind of key informant for the next major goal. The Deathlord could be deliberately luring players there, even by having a messenger give examples of who's going to go to the party. Most players don't miss a plot hook of this size too often, not unless they're dead set on whatever task they're currently doing. Now if you're having some kind of grand overall story tying to the game, such as Deathlord Invasion, then you're going to need a little bit more structure. Winging it completely is not going to work, not unless you're really lucky. What you need to do to make a story seem like it's flowing freely, but allow you to get back on course with the story you want is actually pretty simple. Design some scenes ahead of time with the criteria of when they can be activated. For example, let's say that your story involves meeting one of the Deathlord diplomats at a fancy party. The activation condition could be something of becoming enough of a local power in an area that an invitation for your group is only natural. To make players really go for scenes, you can often mix other plot hooks in there, such as a player's rival going to the same party, or maybe some kind of key informant for the next major goal. The Deathlord could be deliberately luring players there, even by having a messenger give examples of who's going to go to the party. Most players don't miss a plot hook of this size too often, not unless they're dead set on whatever task they're currently doing. This means that most stories you end up doing with some kind of central or meta plot will have all potential storylines of seeds link back to the central story. This is different akin to railroading, which players are one set path and no chance of changing. In this method, the conditions for the story can change quite drastically. It lets the players feel like they're going around and changing the world, because they are, while having some resemblance of an overall plot. The best example I can think of is picture the beginning session of a story as the initial story or pitch. From there, it branches off into 3 different stories depending on the player's actions, and which ones they'll take. From each of these, they can develop in their own stories, with extensions following from there. However, once a certain condition is met in the game itself, such as the realm or regional Deathlord catching widespread notice of the players, then all points can attempt to merge in onto that single scene or story before learning to spread out all over again. The key method for this is try not to make the players go there out of character. As I said, the best way to do that is by in-character encouragements. If the players still don't go along with it, improvise and chug along. Make it clear that by not doing such a thing, they stand to miss out on a lot. I mean, if you're not going to regional gala on supposedly neutral grounds, what up-and-coming socialite would dare miss out to extend his social network by meeting powerful movers and shakers of the region? What thief would dare miss out on the potential wealth and treasure and information that may exist in the area? So now that we know how to make a story, what about a campaign story? A campaign story is the exact same thing, but at a bigger scale. The plot hook behind a campaign itself is more likely going to be the primary plot hook, in which everything else pivots around it or is affected by it. It is a star unto itself that draws other stories into orbit. Around these stories circles other major plot hooks, things that take several stories to resolve, such as long-term character goals, and around those are singular individual stories, and so on and so on. The too long didn't read version is this. Everything should be connected and flow into the next course of action. If it's smooth and you're having fun, then you're doing it right. In fact, if you're having fun, then you're probably doing some things right in the first place, so keep at it. Newcomers to running a game might be nodding their heads at this point. Several others may have gone glassy-eyed, sometime in the middle of this. Either way, it might be hard to grasp for a complete newcomer for RPGs. So let's make a detailed example to illustrate how all of this works. I was just grabbing a snack at this point. Part 4. Example in motion. Chad decides he wants to make a game for his players, as they're looking for something new. After deciding on Exalted with some feedback from his players, Chad decides that the game will take place in the West. The initial game pitch he gives out to his players is that the realm houses in the local Wave Crestian area have been ruthlessly exploiting the locals, far more than was normal. Vast holds of their ships stuffed as quickly as they arrive, before being sent out once more again. Right off the bat, this communicates to the players that the realm is going to play a very heavy hand in the beginning of the game, and allows the players some idea of where the game is going to start. One player decides to use our shaman example mentioned earlier, a young woman who's taken on the role of spiritual advisor for her people, calling herself Whispers of Wisdom with Twilight Cast. Wisdom believes that, as a newfound solar, it is her duty to mediate between the worlds of the divine and the world of mortal men. The next player decides to make a playboy pirate captain with a heart of gold and whose goal is to search for the 7 seas for high adventure, exotic locales, and making a lot of money doing legal and less than legal jobs. The player makes Jeweled Manta the Eclipse cast, the dashing pirate rogue. The last player opts to have something a bit more out of the way, playing a studious martial arts student who lived his life in the Tengiz Mountains, only to one day have his dojo attacked by a rival clan who steals their sacred artifact and kills his master. Crouching Tiger vows to get revenge by tracking down the sacred artifact of his people, the only hint that someone in the realm bought his clan's most treasured possession. Chad gets to work brainstorming some plot threads for the players. The main story he had for this game would involve the realm forces and likely the Silver Prince, a regional Death Lord, becoming involved later on down the line. The Silver Prince likely wants the realm gone for his own reasons, so maybe he can offer something like allegiance to the players, or maybe some resources. He'll think more on that later. Looking through the area, he can see that Coral is a massive trading hub in the region. It could be enough reason for both Jeweled Manta and Crouching Tiger to head there regarding their own objectives later on down the line. Crouching Tiger could find more information about his clan's treasure, while Jeweled Manta would eventually have to go there for some reason, as the majority of pirates in the west are from Coral. Meaning if by some small miracle Jeweled Manta isn't associated with Coral, then it'll only be a matter of time before they cross paths. Chad can see that Whispers of Wisdom will have a work cut out for her, with the amount of stuff and spiritual turmoil in the west. Gods think they can get away with anything. Asshole volcano gods, and storm witches who curse any vessel that contains a woman prettier than they are. Which is to say, literally every other woman alive. Long-term planning, he'd like to see something like the realm doing a full-scale attack on the west, likely regarding the locations the players have a vested interest in. Further down the line, only for such a thing to pave way for the Silver Prince's nefarious schemes. With the brainstorming over, he decides to sit down and focus on the beginning session. The time of the game will take place shortly after gathering the other players on Jeweled Manta's own ship, taking it to land in the Wave Crestian port of Sea Haven. Some of the odd things he can mention in the port is that there are shockingly few natives in the city, while Manta himself will notice that a forest used to be near his location was clear-cut. Whispers of Wisdom, knowing medicine, could make some rolls to determine that the people here are malnourished and exhausted. A simple persuade roll and a minor intimacy could get the locals to tell the players that the realm has been keeping rival pirates, tribes, and gods in check. They have been working many of the natives to the bone. The local realm leader, or Setrap, is hard to miss, as he's in the middle of the city surrounded by a fort. The Wave Crestian leader, the Feather One, is currently meeting with the Setrap as well, and hasn't been heard from in days, maybe even weeks. Crouching Tiger can look into leads regarding his clan's own treasure. The two choices he has could be meeting some of the off-duty realm workers at a local bar to get them to spill any beans they know by roughing them up or buying them enough alcohol until loose words are pried from their lips. Alternatively, he could go find a ledger or journal from the chief appraiser of the docks to see if anything like his clan's treasure came through the region. Either way, he'll quickly find out if such a thing was sold off to the realm's forces in the area, and that the trail itself will end at Setrap's own palace, so he'll need to get in there in order to find more information. Whispers of Wisdom could be concerned at the realm's activities in the area. The Immaculate Order tends towards a listen to us or we'll beat you into the ground type methodology for spirits. She could talk to the village priestess about the local spiritual conditions in the area, in which she and many of the other villagers are worried about the wrath of volcano gods. They have been rather quiet lately, but as the realm forbid their worship, and as the resource mining gets closer and closer to the god's own domain, they're worried that the spiritual courts might try something soon, especially since most of the Dragon-Blooded in the Setrap's palace are officials who are easily bribed. Whispers could head to the local Immaculate Shrine in the area and talk to the priest Tender Brook. Tender Brook feels nothing but sorrow for the people of these lands, as they are forced to adopt such barbaric practices, and looks forward to a full Immaculate Subjugation team in the future. Tender Brook is more than happy to talk about, and can even mention that one of the Dragon-Blooded inside the Setrap's palace is a woman named Amy Ladol, a woman who feels very strongly for the Immaculate Faith, but decided to stay with her own dynastic house. She's a student of a martial art style that commands the very air itself, walking on clouds while striking with the speed and power of a lightning bolt. Jeweled Manta is pretty easy to motivate, as this location has two things he wants to do: save the locals from the conditions imposed on them by the realm, and get all the money from that fancy Setrap's palace. Doubly good if he looks damn cool while doing so. He knows several vessels in the port, so he'd like to secure those vessels for future expansion of the fleet if possible. He can worry about a new recruitment drive after he's done dealing with the Dragon-Blooded in this area. Chad planned out the details of Setrap's palace ahead of time, as he figured this could be an involved fight. There are a total of 3 Dragon-Blooded within the palace at the current moment. The air aspect is a wind dragon stylus up to the form with several charms related to mobility. The water aspect is a sorcerer who uses Brawl and has several summoned demons patrolling the fortress walls will dematerialize. A nasty surprise for any would-be invader. The demons are nothing but common first circle demons, and he figures several Blood Apes mixed with 2 Tomescu for range support will suffice. The demons will only materialize while in danger, meaning they'll be invisible to other senses while they're dematerialized. Whispers of Wisdom, however, has the charms needed to see such spirits, even while dematerialized. So if she investigates the area before an attack, she should be able to see there's a demonic presence in the area. The Earth Dragon-Blooded is a war veteran, at home both on land and at sea. In command of the Realm Legion in the area, but only has a modest size 2 battle group in his home estate, so roughly about several dozen people. Chad figures this is a good mixture of enemies for a beginning circle of solar results, especially only since there are 3 players in the game, and definitely not the writer limiting himself to a small sample size in order to keep himself sane. Chad now has all the pieces in place and predicts several outcomes from this. First is the Loud method, directly assaulting the Setrap's palace with all the force and power his players can muster. Then Dragon-Blooded in the mansion would come out to defend their lands, but the water aspect sorcerer will immediately try to retreat upon learning that the invaders are solar anathema. He will try to bring his allies along with him if he can, but if several solars on location, then the allies of the water aspect know that the best they can do is hold the solars back, so that the water aspect can retreat and warn others about solars in the area. Naturally, this makes them enemies of any realm forces in the area, and sends anyone who is dealing with the realm retreating or begging for mercy. Jeweled Manta has his own loyal pirate forces, but if need be, he could do a recruitment drive for loyal forces to overtake the realm oppressors in the city, just to help even odds against the demon forces and loyal realm troops in the castle. Alternatively, there are some of the more subtler ways. If the players don't want to stir the Hornet's Nest as a realm, they could currently do other tasks. Crouching Tiger could sneak into the realm fort, looking for incriminating evidence against the realm forces in the Setrap's palace, while also looking for information on his clan's artifact. Whispers of Wisdom could then use any findings as she heads to the tribes that worship the volcano gods in the area, convincing them that the Immaculate Rule will reduce their worship to near nothing, and thus make it so all realm ships heading out have terrible storms. Whispers could also persuade the gods in the area to force anyone from the realm to take up their issues with Wisdom and Wisdom or Circle, making the realm play directly into their hand. It could get even better if Jeweled Manta decides to take advantage of this, using his ship and clear waters to make it virtually impossible for the realm to do business with anyone but him, and the realm has very deep pockets. For the first route of Violent Overthrow, the consequences for the action has 2 immediate outcomes. First is the volcano gods in the area. Now no longer fearing the Immaculate Order, they demand an incredibly large amount of sacrifices as punishment for the locals kowtowing to the Immaculate Order, even if they did the same thing themselves. This could result in numerous other pirates in the area now attempting to pick off Wave-Crestian ships and shorelines. With the realm forces gone, surely there is no organized and proper army left to resist them, or protect their supply routes. As pressure increases, the players could very well find an invitation from the Silver Prince of the Skullstone Archipelago, saying he wishes to discuss mutual enemies over the course of a dinner. Alternatively, if the sneaky route is selected, then Chad believes the realm forces in the area will agree to meet with the Circle and negotiate some sort of deal. But if they know the Circle is Solar Anathema, they may instead to try to ambush the group instead. Plans for the set rep will be immediately send out a request for the Immaculate Order to bring on experts in spiritual meditation, which is a fancy word for expert shit-kickers. At this point, the players could very well be contacted by a rival dragon-blooded house, saying they could delay the Immaculate's arrival significantly. They'd even sweeten the deal by saying they could make the villagers work sustainable hours and for even practice their wacky little religion freely. The only thing they ask in return for the group is to work as pirates on any realm vessel that gets through the storms, and pass on any of their cargo onto one of their own ships. Well, the Circle will keep a small bit for themselves as loot. All they need to do is sign one little contract, one little sorcerously enforced contract that does terrible things to those who break and violate its terms. Now, these may sound like overly punishing or daunting challenges, but for a beginning game of Exalted, they're not that big of a deal. For example, if the pirates of the area are now attacking the Wave-Cresting forces in a land that you want to protect, Crouching Tiger could decide to take them on as their disciples, teaching them the ways of his art and how to fight and defend themselves. And in about a month's time, they could be some of the fiercest warriors the world's ever seen. A very nasty surprise for any would-be invader. Alternatively, Whispers could talk to the spiritual corpse, work out some kind of deal, and barter with them. She could even use some of her sorcery powers to conjure up the sorcerer's working, to inflict some kind of terrible curse to those who step foot on the lands, which works great in Tantrum with Crouching Tiger's own benefits. This shouldn't be overly punishing in the social route either. If the players agree to help the rival Dragon-Blooded household and they're forced into the contract, they should allow some method down the line in order to find a way to break out of it, in some way, shape, or form. Or maybe some kind of loophole they can exploit in order to have a bit more freedom. Likewise, they could also pretend to deal with the realm's own forces. After all, a solar that doesn't flare is pretty damn hard to find out. So long as they keep their heads down, they can keep playing in the realm's hands. In fact, they could even become allies with the set rap, eventually be inviting into their own palace under a dinner someday, and then poisoning a lot and killing all of them in a surprise attack. Pretty fun, right? This is just one example of how to make a story. How to make one and spin it off in other things entirely. Next time, I'll be talking about the one thing that's the bane of everyone's existence: mechanical balance. I'll be discussing how to balance encounters with players mechanically, and how to navigate the storyteller system. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. I like having input for these sorts of things, just to make sure I'm on the right course. That's all for the day. Take care, and I hope to see you next time.